Okay, the last rule we're going to cover is the generalized power rule. Now, we've already studied, the first rule we studied, in fact, was called the power rule. This is the generalized power rule, and in a second you'll see why, because it's a rule that it covers a more complicated functional form, so it's a more complicated version of the power rule, but it's more general. The power rule is actually an offshoot of the generalized power rule. It's just a more specific rule for one variable only. So what does the generalized power rule say? The generalized power rule says that if I have a function that is g of x to the n, then f prime of x equals n times g of x to the n minus 1 times g prime of x. Okay, so that's the generalized power rule, and you can see this right here is kind of like the power rule if that was only x. Okay, and of course the power rule then, so if that was only x, this would be the power rule itself, the regular power rule, and then that would be times 1. So you can see where the power rule is a subset or an offshoot of the generalized power rule. Now, the generalized power rule is typically made to cover functions of the form, say, x plus 1 squared. Okay, so then f prime of x would equal 2 times x plus 1 to the first, okay, to the first, times 1, because g prime of x is what is inside. So in this case, g would be x plus 1. So that'd be times 1. So then this, of course, is 2 times x plus 1. Simplified, of course, would be 2x plus 2. Okay? Now, let's, this here, you could also FOIL it out and get the same, right? So if we FOILed that out, f of x would be x squared plus 2x plus 1, and of course, using the regular power rule, it's easy to see that f prime of x would be 2x plus 2, all right? So we can get that either way. But the generalized power rule really, instead of covering sort of derivatives of more simplified forms like this, what if we have a form that is f of x, let me draw a line under here, f of x equals x squared plus 7 to the 9th. Okay, now FOILing that out would be, very laborious. We wouldn't want to do that, but we can go ahead and just implement the generalized power rule. So in this case, g of x would equal x squared plus 7. This means g prime of x would equal 2x. So now, just like everything else, this is a formula. We're going to plug everything we have into the formula. In this case, n, of course, equals 9. So this then implies that f prime of x equals 9 times g of x, which is x squared plus 7, okay, to the 8th power, times g prime of x, which is 2x. Okay, so now simplified, of course, this equals 18x times x squared plus 7 to the 8th. And, even though I've always said before, a simplified form means getting rid of the parentheses, it's just impractical in this instance to get rid of the parentheses. So we're just going to leave it in that form. But that is the derivative of that function.